This Ukrainian drone flew 280 kilometers without appearing on any Russian radar. Ukraine had less than 3 hours to destroy an aircraft that Russia could not afford to lose. An Il-38N ready for takeoff before 1 p.m. A single drone, 50 meters above the sea. No radar could detect it. But that wasn't the biggest danger, because while it was flying below the radar horizon, another fighter was already in the sky, and it didn't need radar elevation or luck. If this drone fails, Russia keeps its only operational maritime fighter in the Black Sea. But if it succeeds, the naval balance shifts, and what happened in the last 6 meters changed everything. By 10:26 local time, a single Ukrainian Liutyi drone was already up in the air and heading towards a target where Russia cannot afford to lose. Satellite photos taken 6 hours ago revealed ground troops firing engine covers off a Russian Il-38N. By 1300, it would be flight ready. When flying in the air, it would be much more difficult to target. That created a narrow window. A window measured not in hours, but in heartbeats. And the drone was already airborne, but the Russians were not blind. Therefore, the real question was not whether it could reach the coast. It was whether it could cross the silence. The theory was quite simple, as the mission was to destroy the aircraft on the ground before it took off. But the clock was already running. It was 10:31. The drone flew over Ukrainian territory when it fell on the gray winter water at 50 meters. In front of us was 280 kilometers of open sea. The crossing would take 76 minutes at 220 kilometers per hour. Most of the silence was 76 minutes. The composite airframe of the drone dissipated radar energy of the return receivers. The rest was done by the curvature of the Earth flying so low. Radar moves in straight lines. The planet does not. Thus, effectively, over an hour, the drone was not present to the Russian radar. It was a ghost skimming the curvature of the Earth, and ghosts are hard to kill. But the sea was the easy part. Land would be different. We'll come back to why that matters. The invisibility at sea created a new problem on the land. It struck at 11:47 at daybreak east of Peresip, 19 minutes to impact. That is when Russia got a vote. Not with missiles, not with radar, but with something older than both: sounds. And in the next few seconds, silence would betray it. 3 seconds past landing on the beach, there was an end of silence. A gray cylinder, which seemed about the size of a thermos, was tuning in on the sky upon a cellular tower outside the village of Starotitarovskaya. 4 omnidirectional microphones connected to classification software were installed inside. The horizons are beyond the reach of radar, but where radar cannot fly, sound can fly. The turbojet of the Liutyi made approximately 85 decibels at 100 meters. Higher compressor tones of between 4,000 and 8,000 hertz. Reduced rumble of combustion between 200 and 500 hertz. That sound was heard in the chilly air of December still farther. What was registered in the microphone was 53 decibels, very faint, and over-the-country background. The sound was broken into frequencies by using a fast Fourier transform on the processor. It compared the spectral fingerprint with its database. Result: UAV. Confidence: 87%. Bearing: 245 degrees. One sensor gives direction. Direction will not do distance. In 8 seconds, other 3 microphones reported bearings. Triangulation of the lines had been done by the fusion system. Now there was a track. Position accuracy: 50 meters. Frequencies: 2 to 3 seconds. The drone had no idea. It believed it was alone. It was not, and within 6 minutes, a system designed for a completely different war would try to erase it. There was no warning system in its acoustic. None exists at that scale. Its Skynode flight computer indicated good telemetry, target coordinates locked, 67 kilometers to go, 18 minutes to impact. The cameras were in a position to trace it. It could not be brought down by them. After 5 minutes, the song hit a Tor M2 air defense battery. That ought to have terminalized the story on paper. But physics had other plans. The Tor M2 battery received the track at 11:52. 5 minutes after the microphones found the drone, the data reached a firing unit positioned 18 kilometers southeast of the target's path. The coordinates were solid. Accuracy within 50 meters. Updates every few seconds. On paper, that should have been enough. So the battery commander slewed his fire control radar toward the predicted position and began scanning. Nothing. The radar stared at empty farmland, and the coordinates were precise. But precision means nothing without geometry. Therefore, physics stepped in. The screen showed farmland, ground clutter, static reflections, but the acoustic network insisted the drone was there, so the commander checked the geometry. The TOR's radar must look slightly upward to filter out ground reflections, at least 1.5 degrees above the horizon. Any lower, and the processor drowns in false echoes. The drone was flying at roughly 30 meters altitude. At 18 kilometers, that places it almost exactly on the horizon line. Elevation angle, about 0.1 degrees, which means the radar was staring straight into terrain interference. It had coordinates, but it did not have a clean return. So the commander did the math. For the radar to see a 30-meter-high target, it needed to be within roughly 1.2 kilometers. At 180 kilometers per hour, the drone would cross that detection window in about 24 seconds. 24 seconds to detect, classify, lock, fire, and guide. But there was another problem. The drone was not flying toward the battery. It was crossing in front of it. That meant the narrow visibility cone would never align properly. At 11:55, the range dropped to 12 kilometers. Still nothing on radar. At 11:57, the drone's projected path moved beyond the engagement geometry entirely. The acoustic system tracked it. The missiles never saw it. This one flew under the radar, literally. 47 kilometers to go, 12 minutes to impact. It had slipped past the microphones through terrain masking. It had slipped past the TOR through physics. But something else had been hunting it since before it reached the coast. And this hunter did not depend on radar elevation. It was already airborne. 40 kilometers west, at 10:50, a Russian interceptor drone had launched. Its name, Gerin 2. 3 minutes after the Ukrainian drone took off, satellite warning systems flagged launch activity. Standing orders kept armed interceptors orbiting whenever Ukrainian strikes were suspected. So this interceptor was waiting. But this was not a standard strike drone. Mounted above its fuselage, bolted into improvised brackets, sat a 9K-333 Verba surface-to-air missile. Russia had turned a one-way attack drone into an airborne SAM platform. Inelegant, improvised, but potentially effective. The Verba missile weighs around 12 kilograms. That extra mass cut endurance dramatically. Loiter time dropped to roughly 90 minutes, which meant the clock was now running on both sides. The interceptor received the acoustic track, bearing 095 degrees, range 38 kilometers, target moving northeast. The operator adjusted course and descended to 600 meters. The Verba's seeker needs thermal contrast. Against the open sky, a hot exhaust stands out sharply. Against frozen farmland, everything becomes complicated. Fields warm unevenly, metal roofs reflect heat. Plowed soil absorbs sunlight. Thermal noise increases. The interceptor had approximately 30 minutes of fuel left at 11:47 when the Ukrainian drone in the air flew over land. One missile, one opportunity. The operator searched for 6 minutes. The sound system reduced the space into an elliptical 400 meters. But somewhere is no firing solution. 12 minutes of fuel left. Then the land made a difference. Ahead, a canal ended. The Ukrainian drone would be forced to fly up. On climbing, it would outline itself against the sky. And when it did so, contrast would come back. At 11:59, it happened. The drone had come up to clear a ridgeline. 3 seconds. Cold December air against hot exhaust. It was instantly photographed by the camera of the interceptor. The seeker locked. Ultraviolet strong. Infrared strong. Mid-infrared strong. All channels confirmed. 3 commands were sent by the operator. Open, align, fire. The solid fuel motor ignited. Acceleration, 20 Gs. Range, at launch, 7.2 kilometers. Intercept time, about 11 seconds. The drone was not chased by the missile. It gave an idea of the location of the drone, and it started cutting the angle. On paper, this was the kill, but coincidence intervened. When the Ukrainian drone arrived at its next pre-planned point, it was at the point of launch. Nose down, throttle idle, swimming in a shallow brook. It was not changing the direction of the missile. It was unaware of the existence of the missile. After terrain masking instructions that had been written very long before takeoff, it was being followed, but the effect was the same. The missile maneuvered downwards in lock, and now it was soaring at 1,000 meters an hour over frozen soil. It was 30 meters high, 9 seconds after the launch. 11 seconds, 18 meters. The fuse was a proximity fuse. Not on the drone. On an abandoned tractor in the stream bed. The warhead detonated into frozen earth. Fragments scattered. The Ukrainian drone 40 meters ahead shuddered from the shockwave, but remained intact. Miss. One missile. No second chance. 9 minutes of fuel left for the interceptor. The Ukrainian drone continued northeast. 26 kilometers to target. It had survived detection. It had survived interception. But you may not believe this. The hardest part was yet to come. Now, it had to find one specific aircraft among many. And it had to get that decision right. Aiming range, 26 kilometers. The drone was able to survive radar geometry. It had evaded an air interceptor. However, the most difficult issue of the whole mission was at hand. Finding the right aircraft. There was not a single IL-38 in the apron at Yeysk airfield. Spare the evil one and Russia has lost a trainer. Take out the right one, and Russia is deprived of the only IL-38N it has in the Black Sea that can be operational. The two planes were almost similar at 35 meters high at a shallow angle. 4 turboprops, high-mounted wings, long gray fuselages. The difference was subtle. It was the IL-38N, which had the Novella upgrade. External sensor structure, which means most visibly, an external sensor structure above the front fuselage. A strut-mounted pod behind the cockpit which is rectangular. That was the mark. The Skynode flight computer in the drone was not merely involved in navigation, it was classifying. Prior to the mission, Ukraine intelligence had collected thousands of reference images, satellite shots, reconnaissance photos, civilian aviation imagery, each frame labeled IL tries Astoni N, standard IL tries de Smit Astoni. Other aircraft. The neural network did not memorize rules. It learned patterns. It was taught the form above the cockpit. It learned its proportions. It studied the shadow which it casts at various angles to the sun. With the final approach, the frame rate was streaming to 30 frames per second. Frame feature extraction was done on each frame. Edges, angles, aspect ratios, relative wing nose positioning. Aircrafts identified as candidates, bounding boxes drawn. Confidence scores assigned. At 12:15 and 8 seconds, it was again classified. IL tries Astoni N. Confidence, 94%. Encrypted authorization ensued. Strike approved. 14 seconds to impact, but then something changed. The navigation computer identified something as an obstacle that did not exist in previous images. One of the ground power units located next to the aircraft. Stack of exhaust protruding the attack path. The satellite pictures were 18 hours old. Equipment had moved, so the AI recalculated. 3 degrees right, steeper descent, 12 meters of lateral correction. Small adjustment, massive consequence. At 12:15 and 19 seconds, the IL-38N occupied the frame. Sensor pod clearly visible. Confidence rose to 97%. At 12:15 and 21 seconds, the radar altimeter indicated 6.1 meters. This distance was the one that the warhead was designed against. A standard detonation would be a hole punched. This one was constructed to accomplish something different. A central charge with an approximate of 2,000 preformed fragments of steel in a polymer matrix was placed in the nose. Upon being fired, it did not fly off in every direction. It focused downward. The fuse at 6 meters was on. The velocity of detonation moved pieces at an average speed of 1,800 meters per second. Time to span the 6 meters, approximately 3 milliseconds. The area of impact was about 4 meters. Density of fragments so great as to break through aluminum skin at once. Due to the obstacle avoidance correction, the cone hit slightly behind the initial aim point. It didn't matter. The sensor tube of the Novella had taken hundreds of blows. External arrays shredded, electronics destroyed, processing units ruptured. The wing root and engine nacelle were ripped apart by secondary fragments. Fuel lines severed. Fire followed seconds later. The plane did not blow up in a great way. It just ceased to be what it was created to be. The radar antenna was still there, but there was nothing that worked its returns. The magnetic anomaly detector was also protruding at the tail, but nothing fused its data. The ELINT receivers remained there, but their brain was gone. The IL-38N became unable to perform its mission within 3.3 milliseconds. Not destroyed in spectacle, neutralized in function. It was not only an aircraft that the drone had struck, it had eliminated the one air maritime hunter in the Black Sea that Russia had, and it had done so before 1300. The window had closed, but the damage was permanent. You now know the facts, but strategy is always open to interpretation. Subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdowns, and share your perspective in the comments. In the final seconds, the algorithm had to correct its trajectory to avoid an unexpected obstacle on the ground. How far can we delegate the right to strike to a machine capable of recalculating a target in milliseconds? Because the analysis doesn't end with this video, it begins with you.